think positively, we have to be really cognizant of our thoughts, and we have to make sure we're paying attention to them and that we are reframing them if they're not very positive. So it's not as easy as it sounds, but it can be done over time. And, some things that you can do are keep an affirmation journal next to your bed. When you wake up in the morning, read the affirmation from the day before, write a new one, and keep down that path of that affirmation journal. Or maybe set a goal that every day you're going to text someone you love something positive about them. Maybe you're going to do that for 2 weeks and then see how you feel afterward. There are a lot of different ways that you can weave positivity into your day that's actually going to change the way that your brain functions. And you're not going to see changes overnight, but over time, you're going to look back and you're going to say, my gosh, I can't believe I used to think that way. I'm so much happier now. And it's because you've rewired your brain to be that way.
What if you turn hardship into greatness, anger into serenity? Everything changes. Make your life a masterpiece. Welcome, I'm Yannick, your host, and now joining me, Mandy Froehlich. Mandy Froehlich is the author of the Reignited Educator, published by Solution Tree in 2025. Welcome, Mandy Froehlich, to the show. It's such a pleasure to finally have you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate you having me on to talk about my work.
Now, first and foremost, tell us in one sentence who Mandy Froehlich is.
Oh my gosh, one sentence. Um, I am a former educator and still working in education as a consultant. I write books on educator sustainability and mental health, but still have my feet in the ed tech space as well because I was a director of technology for a school district. So I do a lot of things, but talking about educator mental health is my favorite.
Wonderful. So let's start really broadly and tell us what education is and what it should be according to you.
Interesting. Okay. Well, right now, I think education is doing its best to hang on to with all the changes and everything and happening because of COVID and happening because of the political arena. I really look at education right now as people just trying to do their best day to day and trying to meet the needs of all of the students that are in front of them, along with all of the initiatives and the changes that they're trying to keep up with. As far as where it should be, I feel like one of the major issues with education isn't actually education itself. I feel like one of the major issues with education is the fact that in our um, country, it's not valued as it should be. It's not, it. I feel like in other countries, education is put up on this pedestal, and as our educators, as people who are working with our youth to bring them to be the humans that they're supposed to be. But in our country, it's not looked at in that same way. And if it were, a lot of the issues in education would be solved by people providing that kind of support and that kind of respect to the profession, that seems to be lacking. So for me, where it should be is we should be in a place where educators are respected and education itself is held to a very high standard because it is supported and valued.
So let's dive into your book. I think it's a very, very important book, and it really helps, especially for educators, to really make sure that they also have the support of, from themselves, but also from, obviously, the people around them, because it's a very demanding job. And so tell us a little bit about your journey, because this is also very important, and you mentioned it in the book, why you actually wrote the book in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, I think that I think my journey matters in the case of the book because I experienced exactly what I write about. It's not hypothetical. It's not, I had to go through that journey myself. And I was, I got into education because I loved education, like so many of us do. And it really is a lot of hard work, a lot of expectation that you are loving other people as much as love yourself and that you're taking care of those people. And I was doing all of those things. And one year when I was a teacher, I found myself being extraordinarily negative, and I was angry that I felt like I was expected to know what my students needed. But when I tried to employ strategies that my students needed, I was told I couldn't because I had to follow the curriculum to fidelity, or I needed to do this, or I needed to do that. And it was very demoralizing. And, um, and so I began to think to myself, I just cannot do for my students what I need to be able to do for them. Like, I can't serve them in the way that they need to be served because of things going on with me. And I wanted to leave education entirely, but struggled to find a job outside of education. And so instead, I left the um, left the classroom and went to be a technology integrator. And through this whole time, I was doing a lot of things like blaming the administration for certain things that were happening and blaming parents for certain things that were happening, and if the kids would just do blank, or if I would have more support. And when I got to the next position, and I was an instructional coach, so my position had changed, my district had changed, my team had changed, people I worked with had changed, and I got there and I felt the same way. Oh, why isn't the administration doing this? Why is my team doing this to me? Why can't I do this? It was a lot of that type of attitude. And one day it hit me like people explain epiphanies, like it was a complete epiphany that I thought there's something wrong with me because everything had changed. There wasn't a single thing about my professional life that hadn't changed. And I was still feeling the same way. And what I realized was that I hadn't healed from the issues that I had had in the previous district. And I was basically bringing all of that unhealed baggage with me to my next position. And this was, 15 years ago. So people didn't talk about educator mental health. There was nobody talking about self care. There was none of that. And I really had to go on this journey that seemed very strange to me to have to heal from something that happened at work. I had to go on this journey, and it was so difficult that I wanted to make sure that anybody else who needed to go on that same journey didn't have to do it alone. And that's where my advocacy is rooted. It's really rooted in the idea that I had to go through something hard, and I don't want other people to have to do it alone. And so that's why I started writing books and speaking about my own experience.
Yeah, that's very courageous actually of you, and also that you are so open. You talk actually about your challenges, but also the introspection that you ultimately took, and realizing that, well, I also have to change, myself. And you really walk us through in this book in a very powerful way, in which we can actually do this in educators, and also prevent really those challenges that educators, in so many ways face. I think there is, in North America, it's about like 50% leave the profession within, I think, 5 years or so. And it is a very demanding profession, so it's so true. And it's important that you share this. And so let's dive a little bit into the book, and tell us about, when it comes to engagement and disengagement, and what are the differences, because these are some important pointers that can kind of help us to understand what or where our path might lead to. And in doing so, we can actually put some strategies and tools into place in order to avoid such a situation that you faced.
Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate how you put that, because it's so important to understand, be given the words to use to explain how you're feeling. And one of my struggles when I tried to heal from what had happened was that I didn't have the words. And then even when I went to research, there was no words, that because it was education is just so different than other types of employment. You're not, as a mail carrier, you're not expected to go to the post office and love all of your employees or all of your coworkers. It's just such a heart-filled profession. And so something that I did in the very beginning is, I knew that the first part of healing is being able to name what the issue is. And that's really where I sort of attacked this issue in the beginning, was start to put words to emotions and feelings and things that were happening. And what came out of that was the terms engagement and disengagement. Um, and we use them in such a different way in education, as far as, like, is that student engaged? Are they paying attention? Are they enjoying what they're doing? Like, there's like those types of things. But what the engagement is really connected to is the term emotional engagement. And so this would be as opposed to like workplace engagement or employee engagement, which are also still important, but don't get at that emotional connection that we have in education. And so the term engagement, as I use it, is really heavily connected to how you feel about your work. Do you feel like you have a purpose in your work? Do you know that, you're not going to like everything that you do, but there you are still connected to what you're doing. And I think one important point is that the the term like understand your why or know your why or something like that is something that is had been hit hard in PDs and things for over the pandemic in particular, for people, like, well, if you're feeling like you don't want to be a teacher, remember your why or know your why. And the thing about that with engagement is that I feel like most teachers know their why or remember their why. What I think they can't do is they feel like they can't do their why in their current circumstances. And that's really what starts the road to disengagement. And disengagement is a complete disconnection to teaching. It is an emotional disconnection. It's feeling like it you can't do your job in that space anymore. You're not emotionally connected to the job, to your kids. And why that happens is because over time, things challenge you emotionally, and you start to disconnect emotionally in order to save yourself, in order to protect yourself. And so disengagement is not intentional. It's not, it happens over time generally. And when we look at some teachers that are disengaged, they do one of two things. They either leave the profession, which traditionally in education, we have not been very kind to people who leave the profession. We're like, why are you leaving? How can you leave us stranded here? Like, I can't believe you're going someplace else and not doing this job anymore. But they either leave the profession or they're the teachers that are, against change, are against innovation, who are typically very vocal, who are usually very negative. And it's a different lens to look at those people when we say things happened to them that they felt they had to emotionally disconnect in order to protect themselves. And this is the result. Versus those are just crabby old teachers that you can't get them to do anything. Um, and and the disconnection is often as a result of several different things like burnout, demoralization, professional adversity, personal adversity. I have a whole list of things that cause that. But those things happen. Teachers try to protect themselves emotionally, and then disengagement happens. And and those concepts are so important to understand in terms of mental health because there is healing that has to happen as a result of that.
Yeah, it is so important because I really appreciate that you bring this to the very fore, because whatever we do, if you're somehow emotionally connected to something, then we really also get the best out of it, and we really kind of in alignment. We feel like on purpose, and we feel like, there's like harmony between, our, soul, whatever you want to call it, and our body. And so therefore we can also engage in a way that is fruitful and that really translates across the board, to our children, parents, and really the stuff as a whole. So understanding this is so important, engagement, disengagement, that we can actually reach the correct conclusion. So recovering, and you are really talking about self-healing, right? As you went through this journey, you realized, hey, I'm actually bringing a lot of baggage, with me, and so it hasn't really anything changed that much. And you really walk us through healing and why it is a process. So elaborate further on that and give us some ways of how we can actually start healing. And also, what I appreciate is hope. Hope is also important.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Um, for sure. And I'll start this conversation with touching on the concept of self care a little bit. And self care really got, unfortunately, a bad rap during the pandemic because it was kind of weaponized against teachers. The message sometimes was, well, we have all of these initiatives and you have all of these things on your plate, but you need to also um, do self care. And it really put the complete onus of what was happening in the district and in the world with the pandemic back on the teacher, which felt really unfair. And so because of that, in many cases, it's difficult to talk about self care now because teachers don't want to hear it, and it's for a good reason. And that's why people have started to call it wellness. They don't call it self care anymore. It's the same thing, rebranded. But self care is really important. It is the way that you heal from things. It has to be practiced. I think that in our situation with healing, when healing has to do with work like this, is that it has to be done in tandem with the district recognizing what needs to be taken off people's plates. Um, and so when we talk about healing and we talk about how we move forward, one of those ways is to be in a space that allows for healing. And that might mean moving districts, moving buildings. That might mean that you need a fresh start. And when I work with districts on what they can do to help, um, create this ecosystem for healing, is that's one of the things we talk about, is that the space that you're expecting people to heal in needs to be a healing space. And it sounds really obvious, but it's not obvious to everybody. It has to be conducive to that healing. So, what does that mean? That means that teachers need to have good insurance. That sounds very prescribed, but it's true. They need to be able to find very quickly how they can get mental health assistance, and it can't be something they have to pay for even before a deductible. It needs to be free. It needs to be consistent, and it needs to be easy to find. And those are very tangible ways that you can create healing spaces. We need to have empathetic leadership. We need to have compassionate leadership, that they are willing to do something about what's happening, not only empathize. Um, we need to have wellness days. I was just talking to a district that for teachers attending professional learning, they actually give the teacher back time off for that learning. So for every hour that the teacher does professional learning outside of their normal, like a day of professional learning, they would earn an hour off of their job. Like little things like that matter. And so part of healing is really making sure that you are in the space for healing. Another part of healing is knowing what you have control over and what you only have influence over. And the healing space is one of those things that you do not have control over. You have influence, but not control. So that's why it's important to know, like, where, like, the space that you're in that is going to be conducive to your healing. Um, and then from there, it's a lot of understanding yourself and a lot of self healing. And I think what makes this so weird is that sometimes it can feel uncomfortable to acknowledge that we have to heal from something that happened at work. Like, we understand healing in our personal lives. We understand that our child wounds, that we grew up and something has just hurt us and now we're dealing with that now. Like, we understand those things, but we don't understand wounds that happen at work because it doesn't make sense. It's just, you know, and so it's understanding that is a thing, and that we have to acknowledge it and learn how to heal in those spaces.
What role do you think plays technology? Because this is also something that I'm really curious, and I'm not 100% sure the role of technology in that. So, do you personally have some apps that you use, or is it more really like to disconnect? Because that's also, I think, a huge challenge also when it comes, for example, to students, right? Having like learning them, let's say, on the laptop, or rather like pen and paper again, back in terms of mental health. What's kind of your recommendation, and what do you do personally?
Yeah. Well, I think, I'm going to answer just about any question like that with balance. Um, you know, there is definitely an appropriate time to disconnect. I think that a lot of us are way more addicted to our devices than we think we are. If we put down our phones and we put down our computers and we sit on the couch and we're like, now what do we do? That's a problem. We need another hobby. So I'm definitely an advocate of digital detoxes, making sure that you um, go through the process of taking a look at your time you're on your phone or your computer, and setting it aside, and cultivating some sort of other hobby. Um, I also think that how you use technology is important. Um, Knowing when you're being triggered, and then learning to turn those things off. So, for example, if you are on Facebook and you are being triggered by political posts, you might want to either mute those people or get off from Facebook for a little while. Find some other social app to be able to connect to your family with. And so part of it is understanding yourself enough and recognizing things like dysregulation and triggers to be able to navigate the online world. Um, I find, generally find Facebook a very fun place to be. I love my friends and family. I love to see what they're doing. I love pictures and those types of things, but like there can be really stressful times as well. And so you have to know yourself well enough to be able to navigate that. So I'm always going to say balance. I don't have any apps necessarily that I recommend. I do think that the new app for, say, counseling services are interesting. I don't think that AI is in the space yet to be able to replace a human. And so I usually kind of, you know, um, I don't want to say warn against that, but caution against it. But if people are using it and they are helping, then I think that people just need to know themselves well enough to be able to navigate those things.
What do you think is the influence of the internet and really the addiction that we all struggle, right? I mean, it's impossible to master because these algorithms, they just master us if we don't, as you said, have some strategies to actually make them work for us. And so what do you think, because we see these mental health is skyrocketing, across the board, not just for students but also for educators. What do you think is the influence of, also the negative influence that the internet, social media has on educators when it comes to their deterring of mental health issues? What do you think? Because that's also something I think oftentimes, yes, on one hand we blame it on the circumstances. I mean, let's face it, it is a very demanding, emotionally psychological immersions, right? Teaching, it's really, really, it's very different, as you said, from any other types of jobs, right? Oftentimes people, friends, they want to catch up, they want to go out and go to a restaurant, and you're like on the Friday night, you're just, no, I'm just preferring you being quiet at home, and it's just like you just need to recharge, right? Because you're
Yeah.
constantly, we are talking, we are bonding, we are connecting, and there is a space for that. But I think at some point it can also exhaust us, right? As in anything else as well. So what is your thought on that, the internet and its influence on the mental health challenges that educators face?
Yeah. Well, I mean, gosh, that's like a whole podcast series, right? I think that it does go back a little bit to how you're using the social media or how you're using the internet matters. And so, like, if you are surrounding yourself with people who are positive and who are feeding into your emotional needs, that's obviously going to be a much better use of those things than if you are surrounding yourself with people who are negative, just like in real life, right? I think the constant barrage of information and connection is a problem for people from the standpoint of educators tend to be people pleasers, and we're often the type of people who, that kind of type A people who believe that things need to be done right now. And so something that's really difficult is if you are in a space where um, things are coming at you and you don't know how to necessarily prioritize, which sometimes is not our strong suit either, or have boundaries in place to be able to turn those things off. So, for example, one of the things that I did when I went through this journey is I removed my first, I started out by removing my email notifications from my phone. So I had my work email to my phone. I turned off my notifications so I could not get notifications. The only way I was checking my phone is if actually went into the app. One Sunday night, I got an email from a parent who wanted me to have something done for their child on Sunday night. And it made me upset and made me feel like my boundaries were being pushed against because it was my family time and I was home. And so I ended up taking email completely off. I thought if it's going to upset me and I don't have any control over it, I'm not going to deal with it until Monday morning. And so one of the things I did after that is I put something on the bottom of my email signature that said, I will answer emails between, 7:30 a.m. 7:30 a.m. and 4 o'clock p.m. Monday through Friday. Outside of those times, I will not be answering emails because I found that boundary. I set it. I communicated that boundary. So outside of that, it was my responsibility to uphold that boundary and other people's responsibility not to push up against the boundary. And I've done that with other apps as well, and other pieces of information always coming at me. I've taken all notifications off my phone. Um, Nobody gets through to me unless it's my kids or my husband or somebody who is very important to me and they are set on a special setting. But it's really helped my mental health and for me to be able to choose the information I see versus the information just coming at me and I feel overwhelmed with it.
That is so important, and I can really tell also you're really in control of your life and especially your emotions because emotions really comes from the word motion, right? And so that is so important, especially in the world now we live in. It's just it's crazy people who still don't actually do what you're just suggesting, because I think that's brilliant, because that's when you really take ownership of your life and you're not predetermined literally by others people's thinking and whatever it is. I think it's huge, so thank you so much. So re-engaging through self-care, you were talking about this obviously, and you have some very interesting and important actually tools that you're proposing, and one is to laughing. So walk us through how you re-engage again through self-care.
Sure. And there, I think self care is definitely one avenue. The way I look at self care is that self care is um, self care needs to be done when you're healing, and self care needs to be done when you are in a really good place. Because I don't think everybody's ever totally healed. So I try to stay away from that term, but we'll just use it for ease. While you're healing and while you're healed, those self care needs to be done. I think the line between those two is that the healing also needs to happen, and there are more pieces to healing than just self care. And so um, I think one of the most important parts to understanding your own healing journey is to start understanding yourself, and that can be so much more difficult than people think, because even after these 15 years of going through this journey, I'm still kind of peeling away the onion layers and finding things out about myself that I'm like, oh man, I thought I was doing so good and healing from that, and then I find this other thing, like, oh my gosh. And so it can feel like, one step forward and two steps back sometimes. But it's really starting to understand yourself. What are your triggers? What do you truly like? This is something that is incredibly hard for people because, especially women or people who are brought up in like a very strict household, they're told what to like. They don't necessarily actually like those things. And so when you start to think about what is it that truly makes you happy, like what are the things that you actually like to do? Sometimes those are different than the things you've been doing, which would explain a lot why you're unhappy. You need to do the things you like. And so going through the process of of rediscovering who you are as a human is really one of the first parts of healing. It's part of being able to name the things that you need to heal from. It's part of knowing if you're going to practice self care, you need to know what you like to do. Otherwise, it's not self care. Um, it's understanding triggers and having strategies for dealing with triggers because everybody has them. It's understanding overwhelm and how to deal with dysregulation, what dysregulation even looks like. And right now we're a little bit in a tough spot with education, really just about anybody, but especially with education, in the way that um, when we went through the pandemic, our um, tolerance for stress, our body's tolerance for stress got higher. So if you think about this line is my tolerance for stress and prior to the pandemic. And I I'm traveling down this line and I come across a little bump and I'm like, okay, that's okay. I can deal with that. I can deal with that piece of I'm resilient and all those things. I go across another little bump. I'm like, all right, I can deal with that because our stress level is low and it's stagnant and it's fine. But what happened during the pandemic is we were stressed for such a long period of time that our baseline stress level raised. So we became more tolerant of that stress, but our body did not. And so our bodies are in this constant state of elevated stress so that when we are walking this new line and we come to a little bump, we don't feel as resilient. We don't feel like we can deal with it. And it becomes a bigger deal. And then if we can't deal with that, we're struggling with dealing with the next bump. And maybe it comes a little faster and it's harder to deal with. And the triggers we don't understand. And we're now in those elevated stress levels. With the political climate the way that it is, it's very possible that a lot of people's stress levels are again going to elevate. And we are again going to have to accommodate that new stress level, which is going to make resilience much more difficult. And so, part of healing is understanding these things. Where is my stress level? How does my body react to stress? What can I do to try to bring those levels down um, and sustain that over time? And that is through all of the things I just mentioned, the self care, understanding triggers, getting to know yourself. And so um, it's a very specific journey for each person. It is different. It's difficult. Um, it can feel very overwhelming to try to heal because healing is not easy. It's not, skipping through a meadow of flowers, chasing bunnies. It is hard work and it's crying and getting upset and having to deal with things you didn't want to deal with or that you had kind of packed in boxes and shoved down. And but it's worth it when you start to make strides and start to see yourself improve and know that you've overcome things that you didn't think that you could overcome before.
And it's so important what you're mentioning, that you really see that there is a progress, right? You look at whatever you face, and you see, hey, I'm actually doing a little bit better. So, and look at these small wins. So how do you personally, what's your best strategy to deal with stress currently? What do you do?
Well, I have a little story that uh, sounds kind of funny, but I was really overwhelmed with work, and I knew that I didn't have a hobby to distract myself from things going on. And so I was sitting on the couch one day and I was scrolling on my phone and I knew what I was doing. I was trying to disassociate and, like just, I didn't even know what I was scrolling. And I thought to myself, I need something to do. And I thought, when was the last time I was really happy? Like I really enjoyed doing something. And, um, and I was thinking back and I'm like, gosh, the last time I remember feeling true joy in doing something was when I used to horseback ride when I was a kid.
Beautiful.
Well, my next thought it was, well, I'm going to have to get a horse then. I mean, who wouldn't think that? That would be the next, next logical step, right? So, from the time that I was sitting on the couch to the time that my husband got home, I had decided that I was going to get a horse. I had researched stables. I figured I had to take some lessons again. I had this whole plan for figuring out that that's what I was going to do. That was going to be my hobby. So I picked about the most expensive thing that you can possibly choose to for a hobby. Bought myself a couple horses, and now that's what I do. Um, so I don't necessarily recommend buying horses. They are a stress in themselves. Um, but I do recommend uh, going through the process of thinking about like, when was the last time that you truly felt joy? And diving back into that. And it might not be as you remember. It might be different. I'm older now. It's harder to get on horses. It hurts when I fall off. Like it didn't do that when I was a teenager. Those are all things I've learned in being older. But but it still is that process of remembering who you are at your core, and bringing that into your life in greater doses will help you through those times that are really difficult, and that you feel like you need additional support.
Yeah, and I think that's also what you have to do when you are in a marriage or something. You have to actually remember back, when you actually fell in love with the person, right?
Yeah.
And that's what you, to some extent, also doing it with back horse riding, right? Horseback riding. Sorry, that you actually you go back in the past. You remember, hey, wow, how I felt, how amazing it was, and so you got these horses. Of course, now it changed a little bit because you changed. You got some more but yeah, that's so important. It just, and it takes effort, especially, I mean, especially if you're a mother, a wife, and so many more things, right? And especially, and I kind of get that, because when you have kids, and even more so, right, that's basically, it's not even a hobby, but it's kind of your purpose. And so it's very easy that you actually, you can't really think but being a mother, right? And so
Uh-huh.
that takes work and a lot of yeah, but good for you that you actually bought some horses. That's huge. That's you. So you're still doing horseback riding.
Yeah, I'm kind of a go big or go home type person, so was I wasn't just gonna think about buying a horse. I was going to buy the horse. But I think it's with also incremental changes. Like, celebrate those incremental changes. Like, being a parent is difficult, and just having the overwhelm with school and all the things going on, and a lot of times educators are taking extra classes and like doing all these extra things. And the thing is that it doesn't nothing has to be done in one day. When you're starting to go through the process of figuring out, do I want a horseback ride again? It can be the incremental changes that happen. It can be well, today I don't have a lot of time, but I'm just going to get online and I'm going to research this one little thing about what it is that I want to do. Maybe it's you want to get back into yoga again or something. So you're going to just look up, are there any yoga places in my area? And that's the one thing you're going to do. And so incremental changes add up to being a big change over time. And that's it doesn't have to all be done in one day. So it's those little changes that matter.
Yeah, they're the lasting ones, right? Because I have a lot of friends who I saw, like, they going back to the gym very early in the morning. They do this for maybe 1, 2, 3 weeks, and then they stop again, and they do it every single 2 months or so. They try it again, and I was just, yeah, it's just because you just find excuses why not doing it, right? But if they're very very small things that you start doing, it adds up, and you can't find an excuse not doing it. And that's really the point what you're also making, right? To start really something new, you better start small, because it's a big thing, right? Starting and having horses and riding, and there's so much thing. If just to think the complexity, then you won't do it, right? But if you do it
Right.
really in small steps, you do it.
Yep. Yep. Absolutely. And so maybe it's, maybe you don't start with the gym. Maybe you start with buying a few weights and keeping them at home and using them every day. And then when you get used to that, maybe you add in a walk or something. And then maybe eventually you make it to the gym, but um, it doesn't have to be done all at once, because if we continue to try to do big things all at once, our risk of failure is way higher. And the incremental changes will still, still add up over time.
You mentioned a lot of things we won't be able to actually cover, but I want to go into your way of really seeing what you can actually do, and it has to do a lot with control, right? And so, walk us through what you can actually influence, what your control is, like your sphere of influence, and then really the ocean of influence, and why this really helps for anyone, especially also when it comes to mental health, right? Because in many ways, at least how I read the book, it's in many ways that we focus on things that we can't control. So walk us through those really three kind of steps, the concepts that you really flashed out, which are very helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think when I started doing a lot of this research, I tried to take into account some of the personality traits of sort of the typical teacher. And one of the things that we like is we like control. Like that's why, in our classroom, like control makes us feel safe. When we know we have control over the students' behaviors and all of those things, that makes us feel safe. And so safety is found in that control, which means that when we feel like we don't have control, we feel unsafe. And that's kind of a normal human thing, right? Like when we don't feel like we have things going on, we start to feel unsafe. Well, the pandemic really highlighted that. The political climate right now is going to really highlight that. We don't have control over certain things. Um, and if we are accustomed to control, and if we really lean into the concept that control makes us feel safe, it's going we're going to try to control everything. And when we can't control it, it's going to feel like we're completely out of control. Like it's going to feel bigger than it actually is. And so, one of the things that is important is to start to understand what you do have control over and what you don't have control over. And and to separate those two things out. Um, because when we understand what we have control over, we can lean into those things and we can make sure that they're done right, that they're done well, that we, are taking ownership of that, and that is great. But the things that we don't have control over, we have to understand that, or it's going to increase our anxiety and our feeling of being unsafe. Um, so I'll give kind of an example from the pandemic. Teachers often have control for the most part over what they're going to teach from year to year, because it generally stays kind of the same. Like they might get a new curriculum or something like that, but for the most part, their units kind of stay the same because they're set by the state or whatever. But with the pandemic, they had no idea whether they were going to be in school or still online. And that was changing all the time. First we were only supposed to be out of school for 3 weeks, and some schools are out for 3 years. Like that is a huge time differential. And and so from month to month, they didn't have the ability to know if the following year they were going to be doing that same thing or they're going to be doing something totally different. And even if they did go back, what was that going to look like? Nobody really knew. And so that was one of the things that really fed into the burnout, the demoralization of teachers during the pandemic, was that understanding of what they didn't have control over, and not feeding into that. And so that's why, like during the pandemic, I think mindfulness was, could have been focused on a little bit more, and kind of that, like, let's understand what we are doing right now, where we are and who we are today, instead of trying to look forward, because we could not predict that. So understanding what we have control, understanding what we don't have control over. But then there's kind of a piece of that also that is understanding what we influence over. And and the thing about influence that is connected back to mental health is that if you are not in a good place and you're feeling overwhelmed and you're feeling all of these things, you're in like you're not going to have the energy to influence anything. And we want to be able to influence, like we want our voices heard, we want our opinions to matter. And so when we take control and we understand what we have control and what we don't have control over, that's going to help our mental health. It's going to lower our anxiety. It's going to help us feel less overwhelmed so that we have the capacity to then put that towards things we want to influence. And so if you want to be an advocate for a new type of reading program, or you want to be, an advocate for teacher mental health in your district, like you have to be able to understand the control and influence aspect of that, and then use that um, influence piece, put that capacity towards that influence piece.
Yeah, that is so important. And you also really talk about acceptance, right? The ocean of acceptance. So walk us through. I really, really appreciate that because these are really important concepts. Rogers, a psychologist, also talked really about acceptance, how important it is also in therapy to actually just accept first and foremost the person, however it shows up. And it doesn't mean we should just leave it that and then we can move forward, but it actually builds the building block for really personal positive transformation.
Yeah, acceptance. Acceptance is a kind of a strange concept because people often interpret acceptance as um, like a how can I say this? Like as that they are approving it. And acceptance and approval are not the same thing. You don't, I often say that I think very similarly about forgiveness. Forgiveness does not mean that I agree with what the person did. Forgiveness means I'm not giving them as much control in my life as they would typically have if I had not forgiven them. I'm not putting my emotional capacity towards that. And I think of acceptance in very much the same way. Acceptance does not mean approval. It means that we are taking the information that we're given, we're understanding that that's the way it is, and we are moving forward from that. And part of understanding your control and what you don't have control over is that piece of acceptance, because if it's one thing to cognitively understand what you have and what you don't have, but if you're going to sit and fume and get angry about the things that you don't have control over, that's not going to help you. You have to accept what you don't control over and understand that that is what it is. I hate that term usually. I hate that phrase, but that's it. That is what it is. And we're going to accept that. And we're going to say, okay, that is happening. That's the way it went. And now we're going to determine how we're going to act after that. But it's not, and it doesn't, again, it does, I want to say it again, does not have to be approval. It just is. And, um, and I think that, like you were saying, it's such an important piece to that framework because in order for it to actually positively positively impact your mental health, you have to go through that period of acceptance too.
Yeah, and it's also when it comes to the political landscape, that's the same thing, right? I mean, you can accept, you don't agree with your political opponents, but at least you accept, that there is a different point of view, right? And you can only come through acceptance with some understanding why this person thinks this way, right? And then there's still understanding doesn't mean that you agree, but you see more and more the different perspectives, and that you can actually have completely opposite perspective, but the underlying really needs why this is might be as honorable, as it is for the other person, and I think that's so important, that we really think that we have to really accept that there is something that we cannot control, and that's life. There's so many contradictions, and we have to learn really hold these contradictions, in both hands, and contemplate it, because it's very messy. But lastly, I really want to go quickly into how you really can rewire also your brain with positivity, because here you give really important tools, because to me that's something important, because it's about empowerment, and it's about seeing the reality how it is, and then actually do the best what you can with it.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I think one of the really interesting things about some of the concepts that we talk about in mental health is that they feel very fluffy. And one of my, I had a few goals at the beginning of this, and one of them was to kind of defluff some of these things. And I believe that the way you do that is with science and with understanding the human brain and all of those things. And so one of these topics that often felt very fluffy was gratitude. And so when I started my journey, I did a lot of research into some of these different areas. Like, what does it actually do? Is it some mystical thing that happens to you that if you feel good more, or something like what happens? And started reading about neuroplasticity and how our brains change. And um, and this happens. Neuroplasticity happens you know, with habits when we're forming habits and all of those kinds of things. Like the more we do something, the more our brain is going to want to do it. And our brains our brain's objective is to make things as easy as possible and to not expend a lot of energy, which means that the more you do something, the more you're going to do something. And so how this comes back to gratitude is um, with gratitude or even just positive thoughts, like you can really say this however you want. The more you think positively, the more your brain is going to rewire itself to think more positively. And that doesn't mean that bad things aren't going to happen. It means that your kind of base reality for how you react to that is going to change. It's going to be more positive on how you approach things than you may have otherwise been. And so if I wake up every morning and I have a positive affirmation, for example, and I say, um, today, um, today I am intelligent, I am successful, and I am happy. And I tell myself that every single day, my brain is going to wake up in the morning and it's going to tell me that whether I think about it or not, because I'm rewiring my brain to think. And it sounds really simple. It's not as simple as it sounds because you have to do it consistently and you have to our brains are actually wired to focus on the negative. That is how they're wired. So which means that in order to think positively, we have to be really cognizant of our thoughts and we have to make sure we're paying attention to them and that we are reframing them if they're not very positive. So it's not as easy as it sounds, but it can be done over time. And some things that you can do are keep keep an affirmation journal next to your bed when you wake up in the morning. Read the affirmation from the day before, write a new one, and keep down that path of that affirmation journal. Or maybe set a goal that every day you're going to text someone you love something positive about them. Maybe you're going to do that for 2 weeks and then see how you feel afterward. There are a lot of different ways that you can weave positivity into your day that's actually going to change the way that your brain functions. And you're not going to see changes overnight, but over time, you're going to look back and you're going to say, my gosh, I can't believe I used to think that way. I'm so much happier now. And it's because you've rewired your brain to be that way.
And it's precisely also how you really expand your sphere of influence that you were talking about. Because it's like, if I'm smiling and I smile to people, the likelihood that I get a smile and a positive reaction back is hugely increased. Whereas if I don't smile, that I don't get one, right? So it's also this reinforcing cycle. So it's very, very powerful, and that's why I'm really, really grateful that you really bring this to light, and it can make a huge difference. But as you said, right, it is simple, but it's not easy, right?
Yeah.
It's not easy to really fall through it because it's about repetition, right? And repetition is really has to do with discipline, which is really hard to keep in a digital age.
Yeah,
Mandy,
absolutely. And
yeah,
and the I just wanted to go back really quickly to what you were saying about if you smile at somebody. I can't remember if I hit this in the book or not, but our brains do have these things called mirror neurons. And so we try, in order to try to belong, which is one of our brain's big things, we mirror what other people are doing. So what that means is that as you start to improve your own positivity, people are going to try to mirror that back to you naturally without even thinking. And so, like, as you become more positive, people are also going to become more positive towards you. And so, it's such a powerful way to like use your brain in your favor in order to really improve how you think.
it's so true, and that's so important. And actually, we even know that the mirror neural system is actually connected to the brain value system. So whatever actually we do, it also implicitly also tells us, hey, there's some value there that we actually have to replicate, and it's so important, especially when it comes to teaching with really doing life, right? And I think,
Yeah.
I think we are so lucky because we truly live in a time that are just stunning. And when you look at what we have achieved as a society overall, then I think you have to, as you said, we really have to make sure that we stay positive and we look at the small wins. And that's why I really am very appreciative that you also mentioned about really strength based. We have to have to some extent a strength based education so that we can really uplift each other.
Absolutely.
So now I ask everyone who was listening, go on solutiontree.com and type in the Reignited Educator by Mandy Froehlich, published in 2025 by Solution Tree Press. If you really want to make a difference for yourself and everyone else, now buy one copy now. Mandy Froehlich, thank you so much for being on the show and being truly a blessing to me and really to the world.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure talking to you for sure.
Mandy Froehlich. That's why knowledge matters. Make your life a masterpiece. Visit now programs.d-ykm.com. Meant to make you grow.